They called me too dark for the family photos, until I became the one paying for them. I remember the exact moment my Aunt Carol said it. It was my cousin Heather's sweet 16 party, a lavish affair in their oversized backyard in suburban Connecticut. Everything was white and pink, from the balloons to the tiered cake that cost more than my father's monthly salary. A professional photographer was there, a man with a shiny camera and a strange smile, trying to corral our sprawling family into a perfect glossy image. My father, Joseph, had put on his only suit, the one that was a little too tight at the shoulders, and I was wearing a simple blue dress I'd saved up for weeks to buy. They called me too dark for family photos. But I remember the exact moment Aunt Carol told me to stand in the back. Subscribe and leave a like to see how I paid for their lavish parties. Aunt Carol, dressed in a shimmering rose gold dress, clapped her hands. "All right, everyone, gather round, immediate family in the front," she directed, her voice sharp and sweet like cheap champagne. She placed Heather, glowing in a princess gown, right in the center. My Uncle John stood awkwardly beside her. One by one, cousins, aunts, and uncles found their places. I moved to stand near Heather, but Aunt Carol put a perfectly manicured hand on my arm. "Oh, Alexandra, honey," she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. "The lighting here is so direct. With your complexion. Maybe you should stand in the back row, just so you don't get washed out. We wouldn't want you to look like a shadow." Heather giggled, a high-pitched sound that grated on my nerves. "Yeah, Alex," she chimed in, adjusting a tiara in her blonde hair. "You're just a little too dark for the family photos." My face burned. I felt dozens of pairs of eyes on me, some sympathetic, most just indifferent. I looked for my dad, but he was already shuffling towards the back, his head down, avoiding conflict as always. I felt a lump form in my throat as I stepped back, hiding behind a taller uncle, effectively erased from the happy family portrait. The flash went off, capturing their perfect, pale smiles forever. Later that night, I overheard my Aunt Carol talking to another relative. "It's a shame about Joseph's girl," she'd said. "So smart, but she'll never truly fit in. Appearances are everything, you know." I didn't cry. Not then. Instead, a cold resolve settled in my chest. That night, while they danced under fairy lights, I sat in my small bedroom and made a promise to myself. I would not just fit in. I would become so successful that they wouldn't be able to take a single photo without me, because I'd be the one who owned the camera, the house, and everything in it. My Grandma Marie found me later, her kind eyes full of a wisdom her daughter Carol clearly lacked. She sat on the edge of my bed and took my hand. Her skin was soft and wrinkled. "I heard what she said," she murmured. I just nodded, unable to speak. Grandma Marie squeezed my hand gently. "Honey," she said, her voice a soft, steady anchor in my storm of humiliation. "The brightest lights often cast the longest shadows, but it's the shadows that show you what's real." Those words became my mantra. For the next 10 years, I worked. While Heather was going to sorority parties and spending her father's money on designer bags, I was taking extra classes, learning to code, and working 3 jobs to pay for my tuition. I majored in computer science and minored in business. I barely slept. I missed birthdays and holidays, sending polite cards with a check I couldn't really afford. Every time I got an email from my aunt showing off their latest European vacation or Heather's new car, I didn't feel envy. I felt fuel. The image of that family photo with me hidden in the back was burned into my mind. It was the screensaver on my laptop, a constant nagging reminder of my goal. My big break came when I was 26. I developed a productivity app, a simple tool to help creative freelancers manage their projects and invoices. It wasn't glamorous, but it was practical, and it solved a real problem. I poured all my savings, a meager $5,000, into launching it. For the first 6 months, it felt like a failure. Then, a popular tech blog wrote a feature on it. Overnight, my life changed. Downloads exploded. Subscription revenue started pouring in, first in trickles, then in a flood. Within 2 years, my little app was acquired by a major tech company for a sum of money that made my hands shake when I saw the number on the contract. It was more money than my Aunt Carol and Uncle John had likely seen in their entire lives combined. I didn't immediately flaunt it. I bought my dad a comfortable house in a quiet neighborhood and set up a trust to ensure he'd be taken care of forever. I invested, I planned, and I waited. The news of my success eventually trickled through the family grapevine, of course. Aunt Carol called, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "Alexandra, darling, we heard the news. You have to come for dinner. We must celebrate you." I politely declined week after week. I was busy. I was traveling. I was in meetings. I was letting them wonder, letting the silence and my absence speak louder than any boast ever could. The power dynamic had begun to shift, and I hadn't even had to say a word. They were starting to see my shadow, and it was getting longer and longer. The opportunity came 6 months later, disguised as a frantic phone call from my father, Joseph. I had spent the time wisely, working with a team of financial advisors to build a portfolio that would grow, not just sit. I wasn't going to be one of those people who won the lottery and lost it all in a year. I was building an empire, brick by invisible, digital brick. I had just finished a call about a promising biotech investment when my dad's name flashed on the screen. His calls were usually short, checking in, telling me about his new garden. But this time, his voice was tight with a familiar anxiety, the one he got whenever family drama was brewing. "Alexandra, it's about your Uncle John," he started without even a hello. "His business. It's in trouble. Big trouble." I stayed silent, letting him talk. He explained that my uncle's construction company, the source of their lavish lifestyle and smug superiority, had taken on a massive project that went bust. They were over-leveraged, suppliers weren't getting paid, and the bank was threatening to foreclose on everything, including their precious Connecticut home. "Carol is beside herself," my dad said, his voice pleading. "They could lose it all, honey. They need help." I felt a strange calm wash over me. It wasn't joy, not exactly. It was the quiet satisfaction of a long-term strategy finally coming to fruition. "And what does that have to do with me, Dad?" I asked, my voice even. He stammered, "Well, you've done so well for yourself. I thought, maybe you could help them out. A loan, perhaps? Just to get them back on their feet. He's my brother, Alex." I could hear the unspoken words, "Don't be cruel. Be the bigger person." The same words that had kept me quiet and in the background for years. That night, I couldn't sleep. I pulled up the old photo on my laptop, the one from the party. There they were, my Aunt Carol, Uncle John, and Heather, beaming in the front row. A perfect family, bathed in light. And there I was, a barely visible shape in the back, a ghost at their celebration. I remembered my Grandma Marie's words that night, her voice a whisper in my memory. "The brightest lights often cast the longest shadows, but it's the shadows that show you what's real." Their light was about to go out. It was time to see what was real. 2 days later, the call I was waiting for came. It was Aunt Carol. Her voice, usually so sharp and condescending, was now thin and brittle, like a dry leaf. "Alexandra? Darling, it's your Auntie Carol." The endearment sounded absurd coming from her lips. She stumbled through pleasantries for a minute before the facade crumbled. "We're in trouble, Alexandra. Terrible trouble. John's business, the bank. They're going to take our house." Her voice broke, and for the first time in my life, I heard her cry. It wasn't a dramatic, attention-seeking cry. It was the ugly, desperate sound of genuine fear. "We need your help," she whispered, the words costing her every last shred of her pride. "A loan, anything. We'll pay you back, I swear. With interest. Please, your family." Family. The word hung in the air between us, heavy and ironic. I let the silence stretch, listening to her ragged breathing on the other end of the line. I thought about all the years they treated me like an outsider, a footnote in their perfect story. I thought about Heather's mocking laugh and Carol's cutting words about my skin. "I'm not a bank, Aunt Carol," I said finally, my voice cool and professional. "I don't give out loans." I heard a sharp intake of breath, a gasp of despair. I let her hang in that moment of hopelessness for a few seconds longer before I continued. "But I am an investor. I'm willing to discuss a potential investment in your situation." She didn't understand the difference, but she latched onto the hope. Yes, anything. When can we meet?" We'll come to you. No, I said, cutting her off. We'll meet on my terms. My lawyer's office in the city. Thursday, 10 a.m., and bring all of your financial records. Every last receipt, every bank statement, every loan document. I want to see everything. I could hear the confusion and humiliation in her silence. She was no longer in control. She wasn't hosting me in her home. She was being summoned to an office to beg. "We'll be there," she said, her voice barely audible. I hung up without saying goodbye. I turned back to my laptop and looked at the photo one last time. The shadow in the back was finally about to step into the light. My lawyer, Richard, had an office on the 52nd floor of a glass tower that scraped the sky over Midtown Manhattan. The view from the conference room was breathtaking, a panoramic sweep of the city that made everything below look small and insignificant. The room itself was a study in minimalist power, a single slab of dark mahogany for a table, black leather chairs, and a discreet coffee service in the corner. I arrived 30 minutes early, dressed in a tailored navy blue suit. I sat at the head of the table sipping black coffee and watched the city wake up. I felt perfectly calm. This was my world now, a world of clean lines, high stakes, and calculated moves. At 10 o'clock sharp, Richard's assistant showed them in. My Uncle John looked 10 years older than the last time I'd seen him. His shoulders were slumped inside a suit that was now too big for him, his face pale and drawn. Aunt Carol was a wreck, but she'd tried to hide it. She wore a Chanel suit that had seen better days, her makeup a little too thick, her smile a brittle, painted-on thing. Behind them trailed Heather. She wore ripped jeans and a scowl, looking around the opulent office with a mixture of awe and resentment, as if she couldn't decide whether to be impressed or angry. They looked like shipwreck survivors who had washed up on the shores of a foreign land. "Alexandra," my Uncle John began, his voice raspy. "Thank you for seeing us." I just nodded towards the chairs opposite me. "Please sit." Richard, a sharp man in his 50s with silver hair and an impeccable suit, entered the room and sat at my right hand, placing a single file on the table. He nodded at them but said nothing. His silence was more intimidating than any words could have been. "You said to bring our financial records," Carol said, her voice trembling slightly as she pushed a messy stack of folders across the mahogany table. "It's all there." The folders were overflowing with papers. I could see letters with bold red warnings, bank statements with terrifyingly low balances, and legal notices threatening foreclosure. It was the anatomy of a complete collapse, laid bare for me to inspect. For the next hour, Richard went through the documents with quiet efficiency. He didn't ask many questions. He just made notes on a legal pad, his face unreadable. My aunt, uncle, and cousin sat in agonizing silence, shifting in their expensive chairs, the weight of their failure pressing down on them. I didn't look at the papers. I looked at them. I saw the fear in John's eyes, the crumbling pride in Carol's posture, and the impotent fury on Heather's face. I thought of my Grandma Marie's words again. The brightest lights often cast the longest shadows, but it's the shadows that show you what's real. Their bright, blinding light had finally burned out. And now, in the shadow of their ruin, I was seeing the truth of who they were. Small, scared, and desperate. Finally, Richard looked up and gave me a slight nod. "The debt is approximately $3.2 million, he stated calmly. "The assets, including the primary residence and the company's equipment, are valued at less than $2 million. They are insolvent." Aunt Carol let out a small sob. John put his head in his hands. Heather just glared at me. "So are you going to help us or not?" she snapped. "Heather!" her mother hissed. I ignored her. I leaned forward, folding my hands on the table. As I said on the phone, Aunt Carol, I am not a bank. A loan would be fiscally irresponsible. You have no way to pay it back. It would just be delaying the inevitable. I paused, letting the finality of my words sink in. Their faces fell. They thought this was the end, the final rejection. "However," I continued, my voice steady, "I am prepared to make an offer. A business proposal." John looked up, a flicker of hope in his eyes. "I will absorb the entirety of the company's debt. All $3.2 million. I will pay off your suppliers, your creditors, and the bank. Carol gasped. Oh, Alexandra, you would do that? In exchange, I said, cutting through her relief, I will take 100% ownership of Johnson Construction and all of its assets. That includes the office, the equipment, the company vehicles, and the house in Connecticut. The silence that followed was heavy enough to feel. The hope on their faces curdled into confusion, then dawning horror. What do you mean, the house? John asked, his voice barely a whisper. The house is listed as a company asset to secure a business loan, Richard explained coolly, tapping the file. It's part of the deal. Legally, it would belong to the new owner of the company. So we'd have to move, Carol cried, her voice rising in panic. Not necessarily, I said, delivering the final, crushing blow. I'm prepared to let you stay. You can continue to live in the house. You'll simply have to sign a rental agreement. You'll be my tenants. Rent will be $5,000 a month, due on the 1st. I leaned back in my chair, my expression neutral. Their beautiful, oversized house, the stage for all their parties and triumphs, the very place where they had made me feel like a shadow, would now be my property. I would be their landlord. Their fate, their home, was entirely in my hands. They could keep their pride and be homeless, or they could swallow it and live under my roof, by my rules. The choice was theirs. The world seemed to shrink to the polished surface of that mahogany table. For a full minute, no one spoke. No one even seemed to breathe. The only sound was the distant, muffled hum of city traffic 52 floors below. My Aunt Carol stared at me, her mouth slightly open, her carefully applied lipstick looking like a crack in a porcelain mask. The horror in her eyes was slowly being replaced by a hot, furious disbelief. Tenants? She finally choked out, the word tasting like poison. You want us to be your tenants in our own home? Before I could answer, Heather shot up from her chair, her face a blotchy mess of red and white. You can't do this. This is our house. You're a monster, Alexandra. A heartless, cruel monster. Her voice was shrill, echoing slightly in the quiet room. It was the tantrum of a child who had just been told no for the first time in her life. I didn't even look at her. My eyes stayed locked on Carol. I'm a businesswoman, Heather, I said calmly. And this is a business proposal. The best one you're going to get. But we're family, Carol cried, her voice cracking. She leaned forward, her hands clasped on the table as if in prayer. You can't do this to your own family. Your uncle is your father's brother. Think of your dad. What would he say? My dad, I said, my voice dropping an octave, becoming colder, harder. My dad stood in the back of the yard and let you humiliate his daughter because he was too afraid to cause a scene. He taught me that sometimes family is the last place you should look for help. You taught me that too, Aunt Carol. I saw a flicker of recognition in her eyes. She remembered. She remembered the party, the photographer, the whispered insult that was loud enough for everyone to hear. Her face paled. That was a long time ago, she whispered, looking away. It was a misunderstanding. Was it? I asked, leaning back in my chair. Was it a misunderstanding when you told your friends it was a shame I'd never truly fit in? Was it a misunderstanding every Christmas when you gave Heather a designer purse and me a gift card to a bookstore? You spent my entire life making sure I knew my place, Aunt Carol. A little to the side, a little in the back, always in the shadows so I wouldn't ruin your perfect picture. I paused, letting my words hang in the air. Well, now I own the picture. I own the camera, I own the lights, and I own the house where the picture was taken. And you will live in my house, and you will pay my rent. Or you will live on the street. Those are the only two options on the table. My Uncle John finally spoke, his voice a hoarse rasp. We don't have $5,000, Alexandra. We don't have 500. We have nothing. He looked utterly defeated, a hollowed-out version of the confident man who used to pat me on the head at family gatherings. Then you'll have to find jobs, I said simply. All three of you. Maybe Heather can get a job as a barista. I hear they're hiring. You'll have to learn to live on a budget, like I did, like my dad did. Heather scoffed, a bitter, ugly sound. I'm not working at some coffee shop. I'd rather be homeless. That can be arranged, Richard said smoothly, speaking for the first time. He slid a single sheet of paper across the table. This is the agreement. It's quite generous, all things considered. Miss Alexandra is offering you a lease at below market rate for a property of that size in that neighborhood. She's also giving you a 30-day grace period before the first payment is due. If you choose not to sign, the bank will begin eviction proceedings within 48 hours. Her offer to clear the debt will be rescinded. The finality of it crushed them. The fight drained out of Carol's face, leaving behind a gray, weary emptiness. John just stared at the paper, his hands trembling. Even Heather fell silent, the reality of the word eviction finally sinking into her privileged mind. They were trapped, completely and utterly trapped. My Grandma Marie was right. The brightest lights cast the longest shadows. Their light had been so blindingly bright for so long, they never noticed the shadow growing behind them. My shadow. And now it had completely consumed them. You have until 5 p.m. today to sign and return these documents to my lawyer, I said, standing up. The meeting was over. If Richard does not have the signed papers by then, he has instructions to proceed with buying your debt directly from the bank. Either way, I get the house. This is your only chance to stay in it. I looked at them one last time, 3 strangers sitting in the ruins of their own making. There was no triumph in my heart, no joy. Just a cold, quiet sense of order being restored. The scales, so unbalanced for so long, had finally been set right. I turned and walked out of the room without looking back, leaving them to decide which piece of their pride they were willing to sell to keep a roof over their heads. I walked out of Richard's office building and into the crisp autumn air. The city noise, usually a comforting hum, felt distant and muffled. I didn't feel the rush of victory I had imagined for years. There was no soaring feeling, no triumphant music playing in my head. It was just quiet, a deep, profound silence in my soul where the anger used to be. I got into my car, a sleek black sedan that cost more than my father's cars combined over his entire lifetime, and drove. I didn't go to my high-rise apartment with its panoramic city views. Instead, I found myself driving to the old neighborhood, the one with cracked sidewalks and houses that were too close together. I parked across the street from the small 2-bedroom apartment my dad and I had lived in after my mom left. The paint was peeling in the same spots I remembered, and the crooked mailbox still leaned to the left. This was my foundation. It wasn't glamorous, it wasn't grand, but it was real. It was built on my father's sweat and my own determination to escape. My Aunt Carol's family had built their house on a foundation of appearances, of keeping up with the Joneses, of making sure everyone knew how perfect they were. I remembered my father, Joseph, always used to say, "You can't build a strong house on a weak foundation." He was talking about character, about honesty. Looking at the crumbling facade of their lives now, I saw he was right in more ways than one. My phone buzzed at 4:58 p.m. It was Richard. "We have them," he said, his voice calm and professional. Signed, scanned, and delivered. They tried to negotiate. Carol called me 3 times, crying, then yelling. Heather sent a text with about 50 emojis, but in the end they signed. "Thank you, Richard," I said, my voice steady. "The first rent payment is due in 30 days, Alexandra. Are you prepared for what comes next?" he asked. "I've been preparing for this my whole life," I replied, and hung up. The next few days were quiet. I half expected a barrage of angry calls or pleading texts, but there was nothing. The silence was more telling than any outburst. It was the sound of them processing the impossible, the world they knew turning upside down. On the 4th day, curiosity got the better of me. I drove through their pristine, tree-lined Connecticut suburb. As I approached their house, my house, I saw the first crack in their perfect picture. My Uncle John's prized vintage Porsche, the one he polished every Saturday morning, was gone from the driveway. In its place was a simple "for sale" sign hammered into the immaculate lawn, slightly crooked. They needed money. Fast. A week later, the second crack appeared. I received a notification from the home security app I'd had installed. The monthly landscaping service had been canceled. The gardeners who sculpted the rose bushes and kept the lawn like a golf green were gone. I imagined Heather, with her manicured nails and designer clothes, being told she had to learn how to use a lawnmower. The image was so absurd it was almost funny. Then came the text message. It was from Heather. I hadn't heard from her directly in years. "Hey, Alex," it read. "So this is super awkward, LOL, but Dad said you're our landlord now? Crazy. Anyway, I was wondering if you could front me some cash. My credit card got declined at Neiman Marcus and it was so embarrassing. I'll pay you back from my allowance." I stared at the message. Allowance. The word was so foreign, so detached from the reality of their situation. She still didn't get it. She thought this was a game, a temporary inconvenience before things went back to normal. She thought I was the same old Alex she could dismiss with a giggle. I typed back a single sentence. "Get a job, Heather." I blocked her number immediately after. I didn't want to hear the whining, the excuses, the insults that would surely follow. My terms were clear. This wasn't a negotiation. It was a lesson. A long, hard lesson in reality that they were about to learn day by day, dollar by dollar. I had spent my childhood in their shadow, feeling small and unseen. Now, they would live in mine. They would learn what it felt like to have their fate in someone else's hands, to be dependent on the mercy of someone they had once considered nothing more than a blemish in a family photo. The scales were balanced, and I was the one holding them now. The quiet in my heart wasn't triumph. It was the calm that comes after a storm, the feeling of putting everything back in its rightful place. The 30-day grace period passed in a silence that was heavier than any argument. I had gone about my life, closing a multi-million-dollar deal for my firm, having dinner with friends, and sleeping soundly in my quiet, orderly apartment. But a small part of my brain was a calendar, counting down the days. On the morning of the 30th day, I woke up and checked my email. Nothing from Richard. I went to work. By noon, still nothing. The deadline was 5 p.m. I knew they were waiting until the last possible second, hoping for a miracle, or, more likely, hoping I would cave. At 4:45 p.m., my phone rang. It was an unknown number, but I knew who it was. I let it go to voicemail. A minute later, it rang again, and again. On the fourth try, I answered and put it on speaker, leaning back in my leather office chair overlooking the city skyline. "Alexandra? Honey? Is that you?" Aunt Carol's voice was syrupy sweet, the kind she used when she wanted something. "It's me, Carol," I said, my tone flat. "Thank goodness. I've been trying to reach you. Listen, about this rent situation," she laughed, a brittle, nervous sound. "It's all just so silly, isn't it? A misunderstanding. We've had a few unexpected expenses this month. John's business, you know how it is. We were wondering if we could just get a little extension. Just until next week." I swiveled my chair to face the window, watching the tiny cars move below. "The lease you signed is very clear, Carol. Payment is due on the 30th. There is a late fee of $100 for every day it is not paid. After 3 days, eviction proceedings begin. Richard explained all of this to you." Her sweetness evaporated instantly. "Don't you use that tone with me, young lady. We are your family, after everything we've done for you." "What have you done for me?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. "Did you do something for me when you told me I was too dark for a photo? Did you do something for me when you let Heather mock me? Did you do something for me all those years you looked down on my father for not being as successful as your husband?" There was a choked sound on the other end of the line. "That's not fair." "Fair is a concept you never seemed to care about before," I replied. "You have 10 minutes until 5 p.m. to make the wire transfer. The account details are in the lease agreement." I hung up before she could respond. At 5:02 p.m., I got an email from Richard. The subject line was simple: "Payment received." The body of the email was just one line. The transfer was made at 4:59 p.m. They also included the $100 late fee for being 2 minutes past the deadline. I smiled. Not a happy smile, but one of grim satisfaction. They had paid. They had scraped it together. The perfect facade was cracking under the financial pressure, but they were holding it together with tape and pride. I remembered what my father, Joseph, used to say as he fixed a wobbly table leg or patched a hole in our wall. You can't build a strong house on a weak foundation. Their whole life, their status, their perfect family portraits, it was all built on the weak foundation of appearances and scorn for others. Now the walls were beginning to tremble. A week later, I got a call from my Aunt Wanda. She was my father's older sister, a kind, quiet woman who had always sent me $20 for my birthday and never commented on my appearance. She lived a few states away and usually kept out of the family drama. "Alexandra, dear, how are you?" she asked, her voice warm. "I'm doing well, Aunt Wanda. How are you?" "Oh, I'm fine. Listen, I'm calling because Thanksgiving is coming up. I know Carol and John usually host, but, well, I heard they're having some trouble." She said the word trouble delicately, as if it were a fragile piece of glass. "So, I've decided to have everyone at my house this year. It's a bit of a drive for everyone, but I want to keep the family together. I would love it if you would come." I paused. A family gathering. The very stage where my greatest humiliations had played out. For years, I had avoided them, making excuses about work or travel. Going now would mean facing all of them. Carol, John, Heather. They would have to sit at the same table as me, knowing I held the deed to their house in my hand. Knowing their comfort depended entirely on my lack of mercy. "I don't know, Aunt Wanda." "Please, dear," she said softly. "It would mean so much to me. You're part of this family. You always have been." The sincerity in her voice was something I hadn't heard from a relative in a long time. She wasn't playing a game. She just wanted her family in one place. But for me, it was an opportunity. A chance to return to the scene of the crime, not as the shadow in the back of the photo, but as the one who owned the whole picture. "Okay, Aunt Wanda," I said, a plan already forming in my mind. "I'll be there." The drive to Aunt Wanda's house took 3 hours, a straight shot down the highway that cut through the changing autumn landscape. I had rented a car for the occasion, not because I needed one, but because I wanted one. It was a black Audi, the kind of car my Uncle John used to call a serious machine. The leather still smelled new, and the engine was a low, confident hum beneath my feet. For years, I had made this trip in my father's old, rattling sedan, always arriving feeling like the poor relation, the charity case. This time, I was arriving as myself. I had spent the week before Thanksgiving preparing, not just packing a bag, but preparing my mind. I thought about all the past holiday gatherings. I remembered the Thanksgiving when I was 16, the same year as Heather's party. Aunt Carol had made a big show of going around the table and asking everyone what they were thankful for. When it was my turn, before I could even speak, Heather had laughed and said, "I'm thankful I don't have to wear hand-me-downs." Everyone at the table froze for a second. Then my Aunt Carol had chuckled and said, "Oh, Heather, you're terrible," in a tone that meant she found it hilarious. I had spent the rest of the dinner staring at my plate, my cheeks burning with a shame that felt hot and permanent. Now, sitting in the quiet luxury of the Audi, I felt a cold resolve settle over me. This wasn't just about a house or rent money. It was about reclaiming all those moments they had stolen from me. On the passenger seat next to me were 2 gifts. One was for my Aunt Wanda, a beautiful cashmere throw blanket in a soft cream color. The other was for Carol and John. It was a large, professionally framed photograph of their house. My house. I had hired the same photographer from Heather's Sweet 16 party to take it. He had captured it at dusk, with the lights glowing warmly in the windows, making it look like the perfect suburban dream. At the bottom of the frame, I'd had a small, elegant brass plaque affixed. It read, "Home is where the heart is." I pulled into Wanda's driveway right on time. Her house was smaller than Carol's, but it felt warmer, more real. A wreath of autumn leaves hung on the door. As soon as I stepped out of the car, the front door opened and Wanda rushed out, wiping her hands on her apron. "Alexandra, you made it, dear." She hugged me tightly and her embrace was genuine. "Oh, what a beautiful car." "It's just a rental," I said with a smile. "Happy Thanksgiving, Aunt Wanda. This is for you." I handed her the gift, and her eyes lit up as she felt the soft fabric. "Oh, honey, you shouldn't have. It's beautiful. Come in, come in. Everyone is in the living room." My heart started to beat a little faster as I followed her inside. The house smelled of roasted turkey and cinnamon, and then I saw them. John was standing by the fireplace nursing a drink, looking older and more tired than I'd ever seen him. His shoulders were slumped. Heather was slouched on an armchair, scrolling furiously through her phone, her expression a mask of teenage boredom and resentment. And Carol was standing in the center of the room, talking to another relative, her voice as bright and brittle as ever. She was wearing a dress that was just a little too fancy for the occasion, as if she were desperately trying to project an image of wealth they no longer possessed. She saw me over the other person's shoulder, and her smile faltered for a fraction of a second. Then it was back, wider and more strained than before. "Alexandra, look at you," she said, gliding over. "It's been too long." It was a statement, not a question. "Hello, Carol, John." "Heather," I said, my voice even. John just nodded at me, turning back to his drink. Heather didn't even look up from her phone. "I brought you all a little something," I said, holding up the large gift-wrapped frame. A housewarming gift, I suppose. A little late. I handed it to Carol. Her perfectly manicured hands took the heavy frame. She looked at me, a flicker of suspicion in her eyes, before she started tearing at the paper. A few other relatives gathered around, curious to see the gift. When the paper was off, Carol just stared at it. Her face went pale. I watched as her eyes took in the beautiful image of her home, then dropped to the small brass plaque at the bottom. She didn't say anything. She couldn't. What was there to say? John had come over to see what was going on. He looked at the photo, and I saw a muscle twitch in his jaw. He looked from the picture to me, and for the first time, I saw something other than arrogance in his eyes. It was a mixture of fury and defeat. "Well," Aunt Wanda said, trying to fill the dead air. "What a lovely photograph, Alexandra. A picture of the family home." She knew, of course. She knew everything. "I thought it would be a nice reminder," I said, my voice soft, looking directly at Carol, "of what's truly important." Carol finally found her voice. She forced a laugh that sounded like breaking glass. "How thoughtful of you, dear. We'll have to find the perfect place to hang it." She set the frame down on a side table, facing the wall. The gesture was as clear as a slap in the face. The room was thick with unspoken words. Heather finally looked up from her phone, her eyes narrowed with confusion and anger, sensing a battle she didn't fully understand. Aunt Wanda clapped her hands together. "All right, who's ready for dinner? I think the turkey is just about done." We all moved towards the dining room, a silent procession of a family fractured beyond repair. I took my seat at the table, directly across from them. The real party was just beginning. The dinner table was a battlefield disguised with fine china and a festive centerpiece. Aunt Wanda had seated me directly across from Carol, with John and Heather on either side of her, a perfect little fortress of misery. The air was so thick with tension I could have carved it like the turkey sitting golden brown in the middle of the table. Other relatives chattered nervously, sensing the storm but politely ignoring it, talking about football scores and Black Friday sales. Every so often, I would catch Carol's eye. She would offer a tight, brittle smile before looking away, her fork clinking nervously against her plate. After a few minutes of this strained silence, Aunt Wanda, bless her heart, decided to try and mend the gaping wound in the room. "Well," she began, her voice a little too bright, "it's so wonderful to have everyone here. You know, I was thinking we should do what we always used to do. Let's go around the table and each say one thing we're thankful for this year." A cold dread, followed by a surge of icy calm, washed over me. It was the exact tradition Heather had used to humiliate me years ago. I saw a smirk flicker across Heather's face. She remembered too. Carol shot Wanda a look that was a mix of panic and annoyance, but it was too late. The suggestion was out there. A few cousins and uncles went first, offering up predictable thanks for health, jobs, and family. Then it was Heather's turn. She put down her phone with a theatrical sigh. "I'm thankful for my real friends," she said, looking straight at me. "The ones who have your back no matter what." The jab was as subtle as a punch to the gut. Next was John. He took a long swallow of his wine. "I'm thankful this year is almost over," he grumbled, refusing to look at anyone. His voice was low and gravelly with resentment. My face burned as Heather giggled. You're just too dark. What would you do if your own family erased you from a photo? Comment your thoughts and share if you felt invisible. Then all eyes turned to Carol. She straightened her back, composing her features into a mask of noble suffering. I'm thankful for resilience, she said, her voice dripping with false piety. And for family. Because no matter what hardships we face, family is supposed to be the one thing you can always count on for support and understanding. She gave me a look that was meant to be both a plea and a warning. I felt a quiet laugh building inside me, but I suppressed it. I looked at her carefully constructed face, the expensive makeup, the perfectly styled hair, and I thought of what my father, Joseph, always said. You can't build a strong house on a weak foundation. Their entire world was a house of cards, and I was the wind they never saw coming. Finally, it was my turn. The table fell silent. Everyone leaned in slightly, waiting for the explosion. I picked up my water glass, took a slow sip, and placed it back down gently. I have a lot to be thankful for this year, I began, my voice calm and even. I'm thankful for my father, Joseph. He taught me the value of hard work and integrity, even when it's not the easy path. I paused, letting that sink in. I'm thankful for the opportunities I've been given, the ones that allow me to have financial security. I turned my gaze directly to Carol. I'm especially thankful that I'm in a position to understand the importance of a stable home, to be able to help family members who might be struggling to keep up appearances. The words hung in the air, sharp and glittering. And, of course, I added, a small polite smile on my face. I'm thankful for smart investments, things that appreciate in value, like a beautiful house in a good neighborhood. It's important to own the things that matter most to you. A collective intake of breath seemed to ripple around the table. Heather's jaw dropped. John stared into his plate as if he could will it to swallow him whole. Carol's face, for the first time that night, completely crumbled. The mask was gone, replaced by a look of pure, unadulterated fury. Her skin was blotchy and red. Aunt Wanda looked like she was about to cry. Oh dear, she whispered. I picked up my knife and fork. The turkey looks delicious, Aunt Wanda, I said, cutting a clean slice of white meat. You've really outdone yourself. I took a bite, the flavor rich and satisfying as a deafening silence settled over the entire Thanksgiving dinner. The silence was a physical thing, thick and heavy like a wool blanket in summer. For a full minute, the only sound was the scrape of my fork against Aunt Wanda's fine china. I took another bite of turkey. It was perfectly cooked. I made a mental note to ask her for the recipe. Finally, a choked, gurgling sound came from across the table. It was Aunt Carol. Her face was a mess of emotions, a car crash of pride, rage, and sheer disbelief. Her mouth opened and closed a few times like a fish pulled from the water. You're lying, she finally managed to hiss, the words slithering out. Her knuckles were white where she gripped the tablecloth. This is some kind of sick, cruel joke. You couldn't possibly... She trailed off, unable to even voice the possibility. Heather, recovering from her initial shock, jumped to her mother's defense. Yeah, Alex, what is wrong with you? Coming in here and trying to ruin Thanksgiving with your stupid lies. You're just jealous. You've always been jealous of us. Her voice was high and shaky, a violin string pulled too tight. It lacked any real conviction. She was just repeating the old script, but the words felt hollow now. I didn't look at them. I calmly finished chewing, took a sip of water, and then dabbed my lips with the linen napkin. I looked at my Uncle John. He hadn't moved. He was staring at his half-empty wine glass, his shoulders slumped in utter defeat. He knew. He knew I wasn't lying. The numbers, the late payments, the worried phone calls he thought no one heard, it all clicked into place for him in that single, crushing moment. He was a man who had just watched his world get repossessed. There are no lies, Aunt Carol, I said, my voice still quiet, cutting through the tension. Just poor financial planning. And a series of missed mortgage payments. 7 of them, to be exact. I finally turned my eyes to her. The bank was going to foreclose. I simply made them a better offer. I believe the official term is a short sale. It was all very legal, I assure you. My lawyer, a very competent man named Mark, handled everything. Carol's face went from red to a pale, clammy white. John? She whispered, turning to her husband. John, what is she talking about? Uncle John wouldn't look at her. He just shook his head slowly, a barely perceptible motion of surrender. That was all the confirmation she needed. The last bit of air went out of her. She looked 20 years older than she had 10 minutes ago. I pushed my chair back slowly, the legs making a soft scraping sound on the polished hardwood floor. Well, I said, placing my napkin beside my plate, this has been illuminating. I stood up and looked around the table at the frozen faces of my extended family. Some looked horrified, others looked secretly thrilled by the drama. It didn't matter. They were just spectators. My eyes landed on my father, Joseph. He was sitting at the far end of the table, and for the first time in my entire life, he wasn't looking down. He was looking straight at me. And there was something in his eyes I'd never seen before. It wasn't fear or a desire to smooth things over. It was a flicker of pride, fierce and bright. He gave me the smallest, almost invisible nod. It was enough. Aunt Wanda, I said, turning to the only person who looked genuinely heartbroken by the conflict. The turkey was incredible. Thank you so much for inviting me. Oh, Alexandra, dear, she started, her eyes welling up with tears. Please, don't. It's all right, I said gently. Some things just can't be fixed. I turned to leave. As I walked past Carol's chair, she reached out a trembling hand, as if to grab my arm. Wait, she croaked, her voice raspy. What? What are you going to do? I paused, but didn't look down at her. I kept my eyes on the front door, my exit. What am I going to do? I repeated her question softly. For now, I'm going to go home, to my home. I let the words hang there for a second. As for you, I'll be in touch. My lawyer, Mark, will send over the new rental agreement on Monday. I'm raising the rent, by the way. Significantly. Appearances are everything, you know. Without another word, I walked out of the dining room, through the foyer that smelled of cinnamon and despair, and out the front door into the crisp November air. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I could feel the foundations of their perfect, pretty house cracking behind me. My father had always said you can't build a strong house on a weak foundation, and their foundation was nothing but lies. The drive home was quiet. I kept the radio off, listening only to the hum of the engine on the highway. The crisp air from the open window felt clean, like it was washing away the scent of cinnamon and lies that clung to the air in that dining room. I expected to feel a surge of pure triumph, a fiery satisfaction. Instead, what I felt was a deep, quiet calm. It was the feeling of a weight, one I hadn't even realized I was carrying for 15 years, finally being lifted from my shoulders. It wasn't about the house or the money. It was about taking back the narrative. They had written a story where I was the shadow, the afterthought, the girl who didn't fit. Tonight, I had picked up the pen and started a new chapter. My phone buzzed in the cup holder. It was my father, Joseph. I hesitated for a second before answering, my old instincts bracing for a lecture about keeping the peace, about not making waves. But I answered. Hello? His voice was rough, thick with emotion. Alexandra, he said, and then he paused. I could hear muffled sounds in the background, the clinking of plates as someone, probably Aunt Wanda, cleared the disaster of a dinner table. I just wanted to say, I saw your face tonight. When you stood up, you looked strong. I gripped the steering wheel. I'm tired of being quiet, Dad. I know, he said, his voice cracking. And you shouldn't have to be. I should have, back then, at that party, I should have grabbed you by the hand and walked us right out of there. I should have told my sister what she could do with her perfect, glossy photos. He took a shaky breath. I was a coward, Alexandra. I spent my whole life trying not to make trouble, and all I did was let trouble hurt the one person who mattered most. I'm so sorry. Tears pricked my eyes, hot and sudden. They weren't tears of sadness, but of release. It's okay, Dad, I whispered. No, it's not. he insisted. But what you did tonight, that was not cowardly. That was justice. I am so proud of you. He said the words proud of you like they were foreign, something he had wanted to say for years, but never knew how. It was the validation I never knew I needed. We said our goodbyes, and I ended the call feeling lighter than before. My father had finally found his voice, and in doing so, he had given me back a piece of my own past. The next morning, my lawyer, Mark, called me at 8 a.m. sharp. "Good morning, Alexandra," he said, his tone all business. "We have a situation. It seems your cousin has taken to the court of public opinion." He sent me a link. It was a public post on Heather's Instagram page, which had a surprising number of followers. The photo was a perfectly lit, teary-eyed selfie. The caption was a masterpiece of manipulation. "Heartbroken," it began. "I don't know why my cousin Alexandra is doing this to our family. She's always been a bit distant, but I never thought she could be so cruel. Using her new money to throw my wonderful, hard-working parents, Carol and John, out of the home they've lived in for 30 years. We welcomed her into our home for Thanksgiving, and this is how she repays us. Some people will do anything for money. Please send prayers for my family during this difficult time. A family over everything. Greed is ugly. Elder abuse." The comments section was a cesspool of sympathy for her and vitriol for me. Strangers were calling me a monster, a greedy snake, a disgrace. For a fleeting moment, I was 16 again, standing in the backyard while everyone stared, my face burning with shame. Heather always knew exactly where to stick the knife. "This is classic defamation," Mark said calmly through the phone. "We can send a cease and desist immediately. We can sue for libel." I stared at the post, at the carefully constructed image of victimhood. Heather and Carol's greatest weapon had never been physical or financial. It was social currency. Shame. Appearances. Suing them felt like playing checkers when they were playing a dirty game of chess. "No," I said slowly, an idea beginning to form, cold and clear in my mind. "No, we're not going to do that. You can't fight shadows with legal documents." "What do you have in mind?" Mark asked, a note of curiosity in his voice. I looked out my window at the city skyline. My city. A place I had built my life in, on my own terms. "Aunt Carol said it herself all those years ago," I murmured. "Appearances are everything, and Heather is trying to paint a picture of me for the world. I think it's time I showed them the real picture." I thought about the 7 missed mortgage payments, the letters from the bank they had ignored, the quiet desperation that must have been hiding behind their perfect facade for months, maybe years. "Mark," I said, my voice firm now, "I need you to get me every single piece of public record on my aunt and uncle's finances for the past 5 years. Foreclosures, liens, credit card debt, anything that's publicly accessible. And I need you to find me the best event planner in Connecticut." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "An event planner?" "That's right," I said, a small, cold smile touching my lips. "My family loves a good party. I think it's time I threw one." Heather wanted to tell a story on Instagram? Fine. I would tell mine on a much, much bigger stage. A week later, my phone buzzed with Mark's name on the screen. I was in my office, overlooking the city that had become my sanctuary. I answered on the first ring. "I have what you asked for, Alexandra," Mark said, his voice crisp and professional. "It's worse than we thought. Or, for our purposes, better." He sent the files over as we spoke. I opened them on my desktop, my eyes scanning the columns of numbers and legal jargon. It wasn't just the 7 missed mortgage payments on the Connecticut house. It was a mountain of debt hidden behind a picket fence. There were 3 maxed-out credit cards under my Aunt Carol's name, with interest rates that made my stomach churn. There was a failed landscaping business my Uncle John had secretly started and bankrupted 2 years prior, leaving behind a trail of unpaid suppliers. They had taken out a second mortgage on the house 5 years ago, and then a high-interest personal loan against that. They were drowning. "They've been living on fumes for years," Mark summarized. "Robbing Peter to pay Paul, as they say. The Instagram posts, the designer clothes, the vacations. All of it was a performance staged on a foundation of debt. They were probably weeks away from the whole thing collapsing on its own." A cold satisfaction settled over me. It wasn't about the money, it was about the lie. The lie they had lived so comfortably while making me feel like I was the one who didn't belong. "And the event planner?" I asked, closing the financial documents. "Her name is Brenda," Mark said. "The best in the state. Expensive, but discreet. I've already sent her your contact information. She's expecting your call." I thanked him and hung up. My next call was to Brenda. Her voice was exactly as I'd imagined, deep, theatrical, and smelling faintly of expensive perfume even through the phone. "Darling," she boomed after I introduced myself, "Mark told me you have a unique event in mind. I adore a challenge. Tell me everything." We met the next day at a chic cafe. Brenda was a woman in her late 50s, draped in a silk scarf the color of a sunset, with chunky silver bracelets that clinked when she gestured, which was often. I laid out my vision. "I want to host a charity gala," I began, "at my new property in Connecticut." Brenda's eyebrows shot up. "The house that's all over social media? Delicious." "The theme," I continued, ignoring her comment, "is rebuilding foundations. The gala will raise money for a new charity I'm establishing. It will provide financial aid and counseling to families on the brink of foreclosure." Her bracelets clinked as she leaned forward, her eyes gleaming. "Oh, this is better than unique. This is poetry. And who, pray tell, are the guests of honor?" "My aunt and uncle, Carol and John," I said, my voice even. "We'll be honoring them for their 30 years of community building from that very house. A lifetime achievement award of sorts." Brenda threw her head back and laughed, a rich, throaty sound that turned heads. "My dear Alexandra, I think we are going to get along splendidly." Over the next 2 weeks, Brenda worked her magic. She transformed the house. The backyard where I had been shamed was now tented in ivory silk, with crystal chandeliers and a stage for a string quartet. The invitations were masterpieces of calligraphy on thick, cream-colored cardstock, delivered by courier to every single person in my aunt and uncle's social circle. The local news was tipped off about a hometown girl-turned-tech mogul, giving back to the community. The centerpiece of the plan was the invitation for Carol, John, and Heather. I had it delivered by a man in a tuxedo, presented on a velvet cushion inside a lacquered box. Inside, along with the invitation, was a small, embossed card. "In honor of your lifetime of contributions, a special tribute video will be presented. We would be so grateful for your presence." They couldn't refuse. To decline would be to admit something was wrong. To refuse an honor in front of all their friends after Heather's social media campaign would be a social disaster. My Aunt Carol's words echoed in my mind as I approved the final guest list. Appearances are everything. She had taught me that lesson herself. 2 days before the gala, my phone rang. It was Aunt Carol. "Alexandra, dear," she said, her voice dripping with a sweetness so fake it could give you a cavity. "We received your extravagant invitation. It's all so sudden." "I wanted it to be a surprise," I said calmly, picturing her on the other end, her face a mask of forced pleasantry. "A way to say thank you for everything." There was a pause. I could hear the gears turning in her head, the suspicion warring with her greed and vanity. The chance to be celebrated, to be the center of attention in front of everyone who mattered to her, was a bait she couldn't resist. "Well," she finally said, the fake warmth returning, "it's very generous of you. Of course we'll be there. Heather is so excited. She's already picking out a dress. After all, we have to look our best for the family photos, don't we?" The jab was reflexive, a final little twist of the knife. But this time, it didn't hurt. I smiled. A real, cold smile. "Yes, you do," I said. "You really, really do." The night of the gala was perfect. A cool breeze rustled through the silk draping the massive tent in the backyard. I stood for a moment at the edge of the patio, looking at the place where I had been pushed into the shadows. Now it was bathed in the warm, golden light of a dozen crystal chandeliers. Brenda had outdone herself. A string quartet played softly near a fountain overflowing with white roses. Waiters in crisp white jackets moved silently through the crowd, offering champagne and delicate appetizers. I saw faces I recognized from years ago. the neighbors who had always looked down on my father, the friends who gossiped with my Aunt Carol over tennis. They all smiled at me now, their eyes filled with a mixture of awe and envy. Then they arrived. Aunt Carol was a vision in a sapphire gown that clung to her a little too tightly, her blonde hair coiffed into a rigid helmet. Uncle John looked uncomfortable in his tuxedo, his face flushed. And Heather, my cousin Heather, wore a silver dress that glittered with every tiny movement, a practiced, dazzling smile plastered on her face. They walked in as if they owned the place, which, until a few weeks ago, they had. "Alexandra, darling," Aunt Carol exclaimed, rushing forward to embrace me. Her hug was stiff, her perfume overwhelming. "This is all just breathtaking. We are so honored." "You deserve it," I said, my voice smooth as glass. "After all you've done for the family." Heather posed for a selfie with the fountain in the background. "This is going to get so many likes," she whispered to her father. "Everyone is here." An hour later, I stepped onto the stage. A single spotlight found me, and a hush fell over the 300 guests. My family, Carol, John, and Heather, sat at the front table, beaming, soaking in the attention. "Good evening," I began, my voice carrying clearly through the state-of-the-art sound system. "Thank you all for coming. We're here tonight in a place that holds many memories for me. It was right here, in this backyard, that I learned one of the most important lessons of my life. A lesson taught to me by my Aunt Carol." I paused and smiled at her. She preened, thinking this was her moment. "She taught me that appearances are everything," I said, letting the words hang in the air. "She taught me that the image you project to the world is what defines you. And tonight we are here to honor the image she, my Uncle John, and my cousin Heather have so carefully crafted for 30 years. I gestured to a massive screen behind me. "I've put together a small tribute. A look back at a pivotal moment in this family's history. Please, enjoy." I stepped back as the screen flickered to life. At first, it showed a series of glossy professional photos from Heather's Sweet 16 party. Smiling faces, perfect poses. My aunt squeezed my uncle's hand, a tear of joy in her eye. But then the image changed. It was no longer a slideshow. It was video footage, a little grainy, shot from the perspective of the original party photographer. The audio was crystal clear. The camera panned across the family, and there I was, a shy 16-year-old in a simple blue dress, moving to stand beside my cousin. Then the camera focused on Aunt Carol. Her voice, sharp and condescending, filled the silent tent. "Oh, Alexandra, honey," she said, "the lighting here is so direct, with your complexion. Maybe you should stand in the back row, just so you don't get washed out. We wouldn't want you to look like a shadow." A collective gasp went through the crowd. The camera on the screen zoomed in on my younger self's face, the hurt and humiliation plain to see. Then it captured Heather's high-pitched giggle. "Yeah, Alex," her voice echoed. "You're just a little too dark for the family photos." The video ended. The screen went black. For a full 10 seconds, the only sound was the gentle music from the string quartet, which now sounded like a funeral dirge. I looked at the front table. Heather's face was chalk white, her mouth hanging open. Uncle John was staring at his plate as if it held the secrets to the universe. And Aunt Carol. Her perfect, smiling mask had shattered. Her face was a crumpled mess of horror and disbelief. I saw people starting to whisper. Friends who had congratulated her moments before were now looking at her with undisguised disgust. A prominent local businesswoman stood up and walked out, not even trying to be discreet. Others followed. The exodus had begun. I walked back to the microphone. "Appearances," I said softly, my voice cutting through the rising murmur. "They really are everything, aren't they, Aunt Carol?" She didn't answer. She couldn't. She just stared at me, her eyes wide with the raw, naked panic of a queen whose castle had just been turned to dust around her. I didn't stay to watch the rest. I didn't need to. I walked off the stage past the fleeing guests and found my father, Joseph, standing by the door. For the first time in my life, he wasn't looking down. He was looking straight at me, and his eyes were shining with pride. He simply nodded, and I nodded back. I left them there in the beautiful, expensive prison I had built for them, their perfect image destroyed forever by the one thing they could never hide: the truth. The shadow they had tried to erase was now the one who owned the light. And I would never stand in the back of a photo again. From the back row of a photo to owning the light. They tried to erase me, but I made them face the truth. What did you think of my justice? Subscribe for more stories where the shadow becomes the sun.